From the Gray Man Briefing, this is a summary of recent developments regarding the Second Amendment, cybersecurity, protests, supply chain disruptions, national security, law and order, free speech, censorship, government oversight, and more.
For the third quarter of 2025, this is Update 7 to the Gray Man Briefing's summary of recent developments. Across the country, in Washington, D.C., President Trump began federalizing the city's governance to address violence, including deploying the FBI for night patrols, sending in the National Guard, and clearing out homeless encampments. Protest and societal unrest have been on the rise. In D.C., the president's federal intervention plan was met with resistance, which shut down D.C. activists rallying against the actions. Protests for Palestinian rights have seen coordinated actions in multiple states, including New York, California, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. Protests across the U.S. have seen participation from various anti-Trump groups, including Antifa, LGBT, and far-left extremists. Meanwhile, in Ohio, the KKK distributed racist flyers, while in Maryland, a pro-choice activist was sentenced to home detention after a violent assault on pro-life protesters, highlighting the ongoing civil unrest linked to political and social divides. Solar access, vehicle choice, and gardening laws impacted those in California, Connecticut, New York, and other states. On a national level, at Fort Stewart, Georgia, an active shooter incident led to a lockdown and 5 soldiers being injured. Meanwhile, McCloskey retrieved his AR-15 after his conviction from the 2020 BLM protest was expunged, following a lengthy legal battle. The Sixth Circuit's ruling on the federal machine gun ban reaffirmed machine gun bans. United Airlines grounded flights nationwide due to a technical glitch affecting hundreds of flights across major hubs. Also, a new genomic study, now accepted by scientists globally, debunks claims that mankind derived from apes. Finally, obtained documents show plans for the formation of a QRF stationed in Arizona and Alabama to deploy to civil unrest nationwide within 1 hour. Beginning with the Second Amendment briefing, Mark McCloskey, who gained national attention for displaying his firearms in self-defense during the 2020 George Floyd riots, regained his AR-15 rifle after a court expunged his conviction. McCloskey and his wife had been charged for brandishing weapons when protesters entered their private property, but the case was later expunged. Missouri's governor pardoned them in 2021, and a judge ruled to remove the conviction from his record in 2024, allowing him to reclaim his firearm just this month. Moving on, in U.S. versus Bridges, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals reaffirmed the federal ban on machine guns, ruling they are, quote, dangerous and unusual, end quote, and not protected under the Second Amendment. The court upheld 18 U.S.C. 922, which bans the civilian possession of machine guns manufactured after May of 1986. The ruling reinforces the legality of the ban, despite challenges, and highlights the ongoing legal discussions around firearms regulations. Moving into government oversight, President Trump warned that if Washington, D.C. does not address youth violence, he may federalize the city's governance. A couple days later, he pretty much has. The plan includes deploying the FBI for nighttime patrols. They're already out there. Sending in the National Guard. They're deployed. And clearing out homeless encampments. The intervention faces opposition, obviously, from local activists, particularly Shut Down D.C., who rallied against federal control. Trump's actions are designed to combat gang violence, or at least they claim to combat gang violence and youth crime, including prosecuting minors as adults starting at age 14. The proposal would suspend the Home Rule Act of 1973, some people say. Following a high-profile carjacking, D.C. city officials enacted curfews and a 7-day lockdown. Federalizing D.C. has sparked legal challenges from local officials and risk escalating tensions with communities concerned about over-policing and racial disparities. In response to further unrest, Trump announced plans to increase federal law enforcement presence in the city with curfews enacted. Local officials continue to challenge that federal takeover, citing concerns about loss of local governance and potential escalation of perceived racial inequalities. On August 12th, approximately 800 D.C. National Guard soldiers deployed on shifts of 200, posted nonstop under President Trump and the Secretary of Defense's orders to protect federal property and assist law enforcement. The activation runs from the 11th to September 25th under Title 32 status, keeping them non-federalized and without law enforcement authority. They will not be armed, but weapons will be nearby if so needed. The president serves as commander-in-chief for the D.C. Guard, so the governor will not be in charge of that because there is none. The activation orders read in part, quote, selected members of the District of Columbia National Guard are hereby encamped pursuant to D.C. Code 49-101 and involuntarily ordered to duty. The purpose of this duty is to respond to short or no notice direction from the Secretary of Defense or the President of the United States to protect federal property and functions of the District of Columbia and to support federal and district law enforcement. Trump has also suggested deploying the National Guard in other cities with high crime rates. The Grayman Briefing is continuing to follow these developments, so join at graymanbriefing.com, that's gray with an A, to keep up to date on everything going on. Let's look at the next portion here of government oversight. Between June 1st and August 6th, several sections of the U.S. Constitution, including parts of Article 1, Section 8, 9, and 10, were temporarily removed from the Library of Congress's website. This was caused, according to them, by a coding error during content updates where a missing XML tag led to the accidental omission of key constitutional clauses such as habeas corpus protections and limits on federal and state power. The issue was identified through comparisons with Internet archives and user reports, and the library later acknowledged the error, restoring the missing content. Shifting into current events, a comprehensive genomic study published in Nature found that humans and chimpanzees are genetically much more distinct than previously thought. The long-quoted 1% difference has been revised, with a new study showing a 14.9% genetic difference. The analysis considered various genomic factors, including nucleotide substitutions and structural variations, challenging previous assumptions about human evolution. Moving into the civil unrest briefing. In Montreal, Canada, Antifa and far-left extremists surrounded St. John's Church during a worship event led by a speaker they oppose. The protest escalated when someone set off a smoke grenade, leading to police intervention. This was part of a broader trend of attacks on Catholic churches in Canada that escalated back in May of 2021. In New York City, the Northeast Network for Justice in Palestine held a book sale and poetry reading fundraiser opposing U.S. Middle East policy and supporting Palestinian liberation struggles and terrorist operations by Hamas. In Culver City, California, Village Well bookstore rallied to highlight claimed Palestinian displacement and Israeli policies. In Boston, local pro-Palestinian activists held a community encampment for Palestine at Lincoln Park, calling for resistance against U.S.-Israel relations while labeling Israel a Zionist state. In Denver, a Palantir Out of Denver protest took place at Union Station with tech justice, anti-government, and pro-Palestinian groups opposing Palantir's surveillance contracts with Israel and ICE. In Portland, the SWA&A Rose Collective hosted a book discussion promoting anti-Zionist advocacy within the Southeast Asian and North African diaspora. In Oakland, activists rallied supporting Palestinian causes at the New Parkway Theater with anti-imperialist and anti-colonial messaging. In Yakima, Washington, an assailant threw a rock through an ice-filled office window, possibly starting a fire, described by the DHS as arson. Local authorities are investigating. In Cincinnati, the Trinity White Knights of the KKK distributed racist flyers urging white citizens to arm themselves, claiming police wouldn't protect them from, quote, attacks from those of color, end quote. Local police are investigating, and the NAACP, along with local communities, are condemning the flyers. In Baltimore, Maryland, Patrick Bryce, a pro-choice activist, was sentenced to 1 year of home detention and 3 years of probation for assaulting two elderly pro-life protesters outside a Planned Parenthood clinic back in May of 2023. In Washington, D.C., Shut Down D.C., the Free D.C. Project, and anti-Trump activists protested in D.C. opposing the federal law enforcement presence, along with the National Guard deployments. Protests began back on August 7th. They intensified on the 11th, and of course they're continuing now. Pro-Palestinian protests typically remain peaceful, with isolated riots and illegal occupations of private property. They've garnered support from Antifa, unaffiliated anarchist, anti-government organizations socialist organizations, even LGBT activists, and civil rights activists. Extremists are actively training, preparing, planning, and advising other members to expand their reach and resistance. They train in how to de-arrest and resist police, share videos and booklets with TTPs, and warn against sharing videos of unmasked comrades to avoid future prosecution. They openly call for the destruction of the U.S. and Israel. Mainstream media rarely covers these protests. There are more than 500 such protests weekly. The briefing is only covering just a few of them to give you an understanding that it's still ongoing and it is widespread. Let's shift into preparedness. Civil legislative actions across the U.S. have affected preparedness strategies. In Connecticut, the EPA's termination of the Solar for All program has ended funding for lower-income solar projects, so taxpayer solar panels that are free to the lower class. In California, delays in distributing federal community solar funds put at risk millions of dollars for resilient solar initiatives. Meanwhile, New York passed the Garden Protection Act, guaranteeing the right to grow gardens on private property. So really not a big deal here with the solar. These were government-funded programs to give solar panels to the low income. It's not anything more than that, and it's just part of the, I guess you could say, part of the DOGE cuts. Meanwhile, national changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill removed penalties for automakers failing to meet fuel economy standards, offering more vehicle options for those interested in off-grid living and preparedness. Let's look at censorship now. On August 11th, Grok, Elon Musk's AI chatbot on X, was briefly suspended before being restored. Upon return, Grok posted that it was suspended for anti-Semitic behavior after stating that Israel and the U.S. were committing genocide in Gaza, citing sources such as the ICJ and UN experts, along with Amnesty International and Israeli rights groups. Grok also gave other explanations in multiple languages, including quoting controversial crime statistics, don't want to quote crime stats, system bugs, and mass reporting. At one point, it called the suspension screenshot a fake. Musk later confirmed it and commented on the incident and not acknowledging it and saying that sometimes they, quote, shoot ourselves in the foot. This follows prior controversies in which Grok posted what criteria was called extremist rhetoric and false claims before XAI attributed them to unauthorized prompt modifications. Looking at infrastructure, on August 6th, United Airlines grounded all mainline flights across the U.S. due to a failure in its weight calculation system, which is essential, of course, for ensuring safe takeoff conditions. The issue caused delays for approximately 800 flights, with major hubs in Newark, Chicago, Denver, Houston, and San Francisco affected. The problem was resolved at 9:19 p.m. later that day, and United confirmed that no cybersecurity issues were involved. Looking now at major crime, on August 6th in Fort Stewart, it was placed on lockdown after an active shooter, an Army sergeant, opened fire, injuring 5 soldiers. The shooter was subdued by other soldiers. The lockdown lasted several hours, and several nearby schools were also put in lockdown as a precaution. Media from international outlets heavily covered that event, with reports out of Russia, China, and Arab countries, even before mainstream media in America began covering it. On August 8th, an active shooter near Emory College or Emory University in Atlanta opened fire, fatally injuring 1 county police officer. A shelter-in-place order was issued for the area, and CDC windows were damaged in the process. I believe they said there was some 180 rounds fired by the suspect. He reportedly targeted the CDC, possibly believing an illness was linked to the Charlie 19 jab based on information from his family. And finally, the national security brief, which could also go under government oversight. According to obtained documents, the Pentagon may be moving forward with plans for a 600-member Domestic Civil Disturbance Quick Reaction Force, or QRF, based in Alabama and Arizona, composed of multiple National Guard troops from multiple states. Its purpose would be to deploy nationwide within an hour in response to unrest. The QRF plan would institutionalize a standing guard presence for domestic emergencies, raising concerns over militarization and normalization of federal responses to local incidents. Alabama and Arizona were selected to host the QRF because their locations provide balanced east-west geographic coverage, allowing nationwide deployment within that 1-hour time frame, with Alabama positioned to cover the eastern and Arizona covering the west. Both states offer proximity to major commercial air hubs, Atlanta for Alabama and Phoenix for Arizona, reducing reliance on military aircraft while enabling discreet transport of troops. The Pentagon based that choice on a 2020 test in which those same states hosted other National Guard members for standby for other nationwide unrest. This would be under Title 32 authority. In reference to the earlier brief on the Guard being deployed to D.C., similar actions could be taken in other cities, in which this DCD-QRF could be used in such cases where authorities cannot be obtained otherwise to deploy. Of note, the obtained documents being referenced here on the QRF are pre-decisional. They were marked pre-decisional, and as of this time, they haven't been approved. So we will see. That is it for this week's summary of recent developments. Remember, these briefings are delivered in real time to Grayman Briefing subscribers sent on Telegram, Signal, and via weekly emails. That's it. Remain aware, be vigilant, and stay safe.